So last week was fellowship.
Jesus Christ.
This week is forgiveness and salvation.
Hello and welcome to A God We Could Believe In, a frank and honest look at Christianity as we find it today. We're going to be looking at the things the church says and does that are embarrassing, confusing, or even downright offensive. In other religious contexts, your questions might be forbidden, but not here. So whether you're a lifelong churchgoer with the scars to prove it, or you've never entered a church and are just interested in the debate, this is a safe space for you. In that spirit, we're diving headlong into questions of sex and relationships, covering topics from marriage and purity to sexuality and masturbation. We'll also be looking at issues of abuse, gender and identity, so listener discretion is advised. Please look after yourselves. Today we're talking about pleasure, and in particular self-pleasure. Now that the average age of marriage in Western societies is north of 30, is the pursuit of purity really worth 2 decades of bottled up urges and internalised shame? If I never get married, should I just pretend those bits aren't there? And what about the whiplash of a culture that expects women to go from chaste and pure to innate pleasure seekers at the sound of an I do? I'm Tim Woodson, and today I'm joined by biblical scholar Charlotte Naylor Davis, practical theologian Simon Hall, and poet, former social worker, and daughter of Simon, Rachel Hall. So today, in my bid to get Simon and Charlotte excommunicated from the Baptist Union, we've titled this episode, Do Christians Just Need a Good Wank? And not this topic specifically, but this partially came up, I believe.
We should say this is not going to be a how-to.
Oh, yeah, absolutely not. Yeah, if you're here for advice and guidance on how to pleasure yourself, that's a different podcast. There are plenty of those. I'm sure they're good. But this one is going to be looking at how have we ended up in this brand of puritanism when it comes to sex. And this kind of comes from a conversation that Simon and Rachel were having. This is before we were planning to do this series. It kind of came out of this conversation. So Rachel, you have had lots of conversations with friends of yours around this.
Yeah, so I think for me it was about speaking to my female friends kind of living together at university, and one of us was reading Shameless by Nadia Bolz-Weber, and that book kind of did the rounds through like each bedroom. Everybody read it, and we kind of sat down and had a conversation, like, you know, hours long conversation in lockdown because we didn't have anything else to do, about how deeply ingrained our shame was, and asking each other, do you have a sex toy? Do you have a sex toy? Do you masturbate? Like, do you do this with your boyfriend? Like, what do I do with my boyfriend? Like, stuff that we'd never, ever dared to ask before. And this is quite a free house. Like, you know, I'm talking, we'll walk around in our underwear. Like, we're very, very communicative as friends. But because each of us had been raised in church, we had a very, very deeply ingrained feeling of, I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be engaging in this. This is embarrassing. It's dirty, whatever. And I definitely can't talk to my friends about it because they aren't doing it. And I had non-Christian friends that were like, oh yeah, I'm just going to nip into like Ann Summers on my way home. Like, do you want to come with? And I'm like walking into this shop like, what the heck? Like, just the freedom of these friends of like, that one's a bit big actually. I think I'm going to buy this one. Like, just their open communication of like talking about sex, what they want from sex, the things they use, the things they do. Like, my brain was just like, what is going on here? And like, I feel like I was realising that I didn't know enough about like what I liked, what I wanted about sex in general. I wasn't speaking to my friends enough. And like still right now, I have friends that I can think of in my head where like I try to initiate conversations with them about like, are you having sex with your boyfriends? These are all friends that like I met in church. Like, are you having sex? What do you feel about that? And I remember trying to have a conversation with my friend about masturbation, and she's trying to ask me about having sex with her boyfriend, and I can tell that's what she's doing, but she's not explicitly saying it. And me saying, oh, but do you masturbate? Like, do you know what you like so that you can tell him what you want when you do decide to have sex? And this conversation was so difficult. And this is a friend that I have really, really open communication with. And I left that conversation being like, these are people that I really know and trust, and I would hope that they feel that way about me. And we find it really, really difficult to talk about our own bodies and our own desires and our own needs. And I was kind of having this conversation with Dad about, this is coming up a lot at the minute. Like, I'm really finding these walls in my friends where normally communication isn't a problem, and everybody gets really embarrassed and everybody gets really shy. So I'm trying to do it more, and I'm trying to talk about it more so that they know that it's okay. And
Yeah.
it's not awkward to talk about it and
Yeah,
think about
yeah.
it.
That's great. That's definitely not conversations I've had with male friends in church. And I guess, granted, I've been out of church for a long time, about 5 years now, I guess, since I last actually went to a service. But yeah, like that just never came up. And I think the cultural norm was it's just sort of expected that men just get on with it. But I think there's still some benefit in talking about this idea of like, what do you like and what do you don't like? Because I think it's sort of expected that men will like all the same things. And I think, you know, this absence of communication is a real problem because men don't know what's normal for other men, for other relationships. If we're also not talking about it, then we don't know what's normal. We're talking like just after, it's been about a week since Netflix released Adolescence, which was a really powerful exploration of maleness, and particularly a young boy who murders a young girl. And part of the big issue with this is that nobody seemingly in his life saw it coming. Nobody knew that what he was doing in his own time. And I think just there's an extreme example, but the lack of information, the lack of communication about anything like this is problematic. And you know, and it means that men don't know how to talk to women about what they want. And if women don't know what they want or how to communicate that, then we have a real problem on our hands, because then you get married, you do the thing that everyone expects you to do, and you've got no tools to navigate any of that.
And I don't know if this is a purely British thing, but I think there's definitely an exceeding awkwardness in our society. It's not limited to the church. I remember watching Friends in the 90s and being struck by the nature of the sex comedy. Because British comedy at that time, the humour was in the awkwardness and the embarrassment. Whereas here was a comedy, an accessible, open comedy about people who have sex, and funny things happen when they have sex. It's not that the sex itself is what makes it funny. Whereas British comedy is always about that awkwardness and embarrassment. I've tried to think about a British comedy, contemporary comedy. Rachel and I talked about Fleabag, but even then there's a high degree of kind of cringe in that comedy. And I thought about Ted Lasso, but that's really an American comedy that happens to be in the UK. So I think we, as a society, a British society, we still have a problem. It's not just a church thing, that we are not comfortable talking about sex.
No. So societally, you would say that. I mean, if you have ever watched Love Island, I think what you would notice is
maybe that's the missing piece in my life.
People on that, there is a less of a squeamishness to talk about it. And I think some of what Rachel was saying about friends who were happy to go to Ann Summers and openly pick out toys and things like that. I guess to your point though, Simon, if society is not keen on talking openly about, if British society is not keen on openly talking about sex, then I certainly never got any of that from the church. I was given a book by a youth pastor probably when I was about 13, 14, and the opening line was, "All guys wank." And and I'm not sure I got much past that, really. I think I was just like, well,
you're like, well, that's okay.
There we go. Well, that's settled that. Yeah. But other than that, I don't really remember any actual talk about like sexual practice. Certainly nothing else about masturbation. Nothing other than just probably don't do it.
Yeah. And certainly I never encountered a conversation about female masturbation.
No, absolutely
I mean,
not.
just nowhere. So not in my general life either, but like definitely not in church. Like that. So male masturbation was talked about in church as a thing that, you know, maybe shouldn't be done or should be controlled or whatever. But female masturbation and sexual pleasure just was not a conversation that we had. And again, you know, we've had an episode where we've talked about abuse, but you're like, one of the ways we stop things happening is by having conversations about what's good as well as what's bad. Because often you don't know you're in a bad situation if you don't know yourself until it's happened. And then you're like, that wasn't something I liked, but you have had no way to talk about it. You've just got no language for it. You've got no tools for it. You've got no way to explain to other people what happened or why it felt wrong or any of those things. So yeah, but female pleasure, like just non-existent.
I think the thing that's interesting for me is thinking about like growing up in church and going to a Church of England school, any kind of sex education that we had, they divided the boys and girls. So the boys went into one room, talked about condoms, talked about erections, whatever. And I don't remember what the girls talked about.
Periods.
I remember I remember like, you know, in year 6 being shown a video of like some naked bodies, and we got shown a pad, and I don't remember much else. The things that I remember of like seeing bodies for the first time are like in films.
Right. Yeah.
And I remember like, I remember, this is really niche, I remember watching a deleted scene from Mamma Mia, and I was probably like 8 or 9 years old. And there's a deleted scene in Mamma Mia where one of the characters' butt crack is visible. And this was the like first time that I'd ever seen a butt crack. And I was on my own in the living room next door. And I was like, I don't know what to do with this information. Like, this I feel like I'm being naughty.
Yeah.
And I remember my mum walking in and me like scrambling for the remote, being like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something I'm not supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know this was in there. I remember like pleading to my mum and being like, I'm so sorry. Like, I felt like I was going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
And I think this feeling of you're going to get in trouble, you're doing something wrong, you are impure, damned, not going to be loved if you are engaging in these feelings and this desire and looking at things like even accidentally. There's something maybe there about being a child and looking at stuff that's not appropriate, but more just like, that's a grown-up body, and I don't know how I feel about seeing that. And I love my parents very much, but my mum didn't say, oh, that's okay. She said, what are you watching?
Yeah.
And I was like, it's just the deleted scenes on Mamma Mia. Like, I didn't know. And it's just this feeling of constant, like, just, you sort of feel like you're being shifty.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're like, I want to know more about that, but I don't know who to ask because I don't feel comfortable asking my parents because they're my parents. Like, you know, especially going through high school, male desire and who boys were sleeping with. And like, I remember boys in class telling me like, oh, have you heard this 1975 song? I had sex with that for the first time. It was very, very open. And me just having to sit there and receive this information and be like, okay, I'm never going to hear that song the same way. And I still think about that conversation when I listen to that song, because that boy had the freedom of being like, oh, I had sex the first time to this song, and he was pleased about it. He was talking openly about it, and that was allowed. And this culture that you're growing up in societally of like the slag, the whore, in comparison to the player, all that did was when I went to church, I was like, oh, but I'm like, that is what's happening. And when you go to church and people talk about male desire, you're like, oh, well, yeah, sure, because we know that boys feel this way. And I remember boys in class being like, oh, you know, the teachers have been told like not to get us to stand up in class because we might get a boner. But like, you know, when girls are on their periods and they're like, well, I might be bleeding through my skirt right now, we were still asked to stand up. And I remember all of us girls being like, is this true? Have the boys been told that they don't have to stand up at all in class because they might have a boner? Like, just this constant, like, that's what it's like for them.
Yeah.
This is what it's like for us. And you're just, rather than bringing the two groups of people together and going, let's have a conversation together because you're all teenagers, you're all horny as... you know, let's talk about it. You divide the groups of people and you talk about like very, very individual experiences. Because what you were saying earlier, Tim, of like, I don't know what it's like for all guys to have sex. Like, we just make assumptions all the time. And I think the church plays off this idea of like, well, we don't talk about it in society either because we're British and we're awkward and we don't like it and it's uncomfortable. So if society isn't talking about female desire and society thinks that women that like sex so much are slags, they're whores, whatever, we can feed off that and we're sort of allowed to just continue to not mention it either because society isn't either.
I mean, we've talked a lot about like different cultural touch points, but that does feel like all we had. Like that same experience you had of what as an adult feels like a very tame example of flesh on screen and your reaction to that. So I remember watching Skins for the first time when that first came out, and I was a sort of maybe mid-teens kind of thing, and it was a sort of at times racy portrayal of just teen life, kind of bunch of misfits getting up to things, and that felt like to me the first time where as a teenager it was acknowledged almost that sexuality was and people were doing it and people were doing it in different ways, and there were lots of problematic relationships explored in that. Definitely wasn't the kind of place where you would go and try and learn the thing, but you got a sense of like that was what was normal, and it wasn't necessarily any better than what was being taught elsewhere. So I guess there's It does feel like there's this real vacuum of experience and information, which is odd because it's one of the most fundamental human experiences. Like, we are all here because someone had sex.
Not my parents. I refuse.
I do remember one of my children, I can't remember which one it was.
What are you going to say?
Saying, you were so lucky because you only had to have sex twice and you got 3 children out of it.
That is luck.
Yeah.
That's because it's such a chore. Like, yes, we were very lucky.
Yeah.
I mean, it is like that. There isn't, like, again, I mean, female desire particularly is always displayed, you know, for most of the 20th century, and so in media is displayed as bad. So women get punished. You know, the classic is in horror genres. You know, Scream played on it, but that kind of like, don't have sex, you'll end up dead. But what they mean is the woman will end up dead.
Yes. Yeah.
And then if you go back into the 50s, you know, the femme fatale, like, we're all allowed to enjoy a woman, and we're allowed to be voyeuristic, and we're allowed to enjoy her sexuality as long as she gets punished for it at the end. You know, Samson and Delilah by Cecil B. DeMille is a classic. Like, it could not be more sexual. She is absolutely dripping in sexuality. The first time you see Delilah in that film, she's eating a plum. And it's this long, languid shot on her body, and it's unbelievable. Like, it's so voyeuristic, but it's okay because she dies. Right. And the woman who survives is the nice virginal woman from the Hebrew village down the road. Women's desire gets punished as well. So one of the things that women learn is not only we're not going to talk about it, but when we do see it, it's in the wrong type of woman. It's in, and it's going to end badly for you if you do that thing. It's not good for you. Men's sexuality is slightly differently portrayed. Like, you might get told off, but you'll probably get the woman in the end. Yeah. The woman that you chase down, the woman that you treat badly, you'll probably win. In some way. She won't win. Chicken and egg. Is it the church that does it first? Or, you know, but we now end up with a situation where, definitely when I was teaching, sex education from a Christian perspective in schools, and I was probably more sexually explicit than most people doing that sort of stuff because I just was a youth worker in my other life as well, in normal spaces, but we didn't really engage with enjoyment. I don't think I ever tried to shame anybody. That wasn't my thing, but I'm sure that shame was one of the things that came across because we're just going to minimise. We're going to minimise enjoyment. We're not going to talk about consent because we didn't have that word in the late 90s, as far as I can tell. I definitely didn't hear it until sometime into the thousands. We definitely minimised those things. It was about control. How do you control yourself? How do you make sure you're not doing the wrong thing? But never, what's the right thing? What's good for you? What's enjoyable? How do you enjoy it? We're not going there. We don't trust you with that.
So what's in the Bible, Charlotte? I was going to try and think of a clever way to introduce this, but I sod it. Let's just go with it.
About masturbation?
Well, what does the Bible teach about masturbation?
Well, or about us as sexual beings more generally.
I mean, very little. We have one text that's really about sexuality in an enjoyable sense, and that's the Song of Solomon. And in there we have a woman who is desiring sex, desiring to be touched, desiring to be seen, and has her own desires. And we have a man who is desiring someone and chasing after them. It's not an unproblematic text, but it is sex outside of marriage and sex for fun. There's no concept of this is sex for procreation. So it's interesting that we have the idea that sex in a biblical sense is always for procreation, and that's partly because it's in our marriage vows, right? Like the Church of England marriage vows, marriage is a thing to be taken solemnly and, you know, not lightly, and for the multiplication, blah blah blah. So that's in our marriage vows, but we do have a biblical example of that not being the case, and that's Song of Songs. Elsewhere, we really don't have a lot of teaching about sexuality. Female sexuality particularly is pretty much absent for its own sake. So Esther, we have a woman who has to make the king find pleasure in her, and you can read that any way you like. It seems, you know, she's a sex trafficked woman essentially, and so are the women in that story. So that's not a great example of female sexuality. It's still about how men can be placated. We have women like Delilah who are miscast as being sexually provocative. There's not a lot about her sexuality at all, really, in there. And then we have this idea of masturbation being a sin and spilling your seed, and the sin of Onan, as it's called, onanism. Victorians were very onto that They kind of, you can read some really interesting Victorian stuff about how onanism is the worst thing in the world, which is just having a wank.
Right, okay. Where does that come from then in the Bible?
It's Genesis 38.
Okay.
So we're right back at the beginning.
Yeah.
And the story is that the Lord kills this guy called and his wife Tamar is left behind. And the rule is that if your brother dies and leaves a wife without children, have sex with enter into what's called a levirate marriage. You have sex with your husband's wife and give her children, because then she still has children.
Right.
She's still included in the family. This is a rule. It's one of the few times where the rules are on the woman's side. It doesn't sound like it from where we are, because that's not how we do marriage. But in that situation where a woman's safety is based on her being connected by having children too. There's a reason for the family to look after her now. There's a reason for them to keep her safe, to keep her fed. So having a child is a real bonus for a woman, right? It keeps you safe legally.
Yeah.
So what you're supposed to do is do that. And Onan pulls out, and everybody agrees that the sin here is coitus interruptus. That's how they like to write it. But the sin is that he doesn't give her the legal validation that she's meant to have. But because it has this bit where it says, and the Lord says, because you spilled your seed on the ground, you're now cursed. We've gone, it must be the spilling of seed. Therefore, anytime someone ejaculates and it's not for procreation, that must be a sin. Therefore, masturbation is a sin. Missing out this whole context where the problem actually is when you don't obey the rules that God has set down to keep women safe in your community.
Right.
That's the sin. It's a very complicated story where later on Tamar cons the father into having sex with her by pretending to be a prostitute, and when they're about to kind of like punish her for having sex outside of marriage, she reveals herself, and the law goes, actually, yeah, she was in the right. You guys have done the wrong thing. So it's one of the few stories where we're on the women's side, but the sin that has become the sin of masturbation, which is where most of my teaching about why it was wrong for young men to masturbate came from, is not that. And once again, when we've told this story, it's a story about Tamar, and we've made it a story about men.
Obviously.
What a surprise.
Yeah,
and we've made it, and we've taken it, and you've gone, the point of this must be the man in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Not protecting women, not thinking about what the legal responsibilities are for women when they're being left destitute by another guy committing another sin. And, you know, but also it's an interesting thing that we've taken. It doesn't really get mentioned again anywhere else in the Bible.
Yeah, what's funny to me about that is that I've definitely heard examples of Christian men who have decided that it's fine as long as you pull out. So that the sin would be to ejaculate inside a woman. That would be when it's wrong. So it's really funny. I mean, if this is a shock to you, this is another sort of regular God we could believe in reminder to actually read your Bible before attempting to come up with a theology. Anyway, what about the rest of the book then?
I'm thinking of, because we've talked about marriage quite a lot, and a lot of people who are big into marriage talk about this idea of being one flesh. And then Paul seems to have some kind of spiritual understanding of sex, because he says, you know, if you have sex with a sex worker, you are kind of joined with them. So it's more than a physical act. There's something else, whether you consider it spiritual or emotional or psychological. There's definitely an idea that sex is a vital sort of human activity, but it is something that like effectively joins you. It's like it's the way we get married in some ways.
The difficulty with constructing that sort of, I think, sexual ethic from the Bible is that the opinions on sex in the Bible change all the way through it. So this is Genesis 38. By the time we get to Paul in 1 Corinthians, that section, 1 Corinthians 6, we've gone through a good few thousand years. Civilization has changed quite a lot. Structures around civilization have changed a lot. And so Paul gives a different teaching. His teaching about being one flesh would not make sense in some ways, or it would make sense in Genesis. A man definitely can be one flesh with a lot of women. Whereas when I was taught that when having sex made you one flesh, people did all of these examples where they had they glued pieces of paper together and they tore them off in the different colours, and you can't be one flesh with more than one person. Well, in Genesis 38, you definitely can be.
Yes.
And that's not what's happening here anyway. No one's saying that Tamar becomes one flesh with Onan. They're saying she's owed a child. This is your duty. So sex here is a duty and a responsibility, but not a kind of like massively romantic thing. So I think one of the problems is we have different civilizations talking different ways. By the time we get to Paul, we're talking about idealized ideas of marriage that Greco-Roman societies talk about, and the household as a microcosm of the state. And he takes that on as like the kingdom. Like, how is that going to work? One of the things I would say about that passage in 1 Corinthians 6 is it's really a passage about how unified you are to Christ when you are in Christ, not a passage about how unified you are to a person when you have sex with them. And he's going to make comments about eating food and how that unifies you to an idol or doesn't. So everything for Paul is both physical and spiritual. Mm-hmm. You can't just put that on sex. I'm happy for you to do that with your theology. You want to put a sexual theology that's about joining together and flesh coming together, but you need to therefore also be thinking about what you do with your body when you eat, what you do, because Paul is not just going, everything else in life is split into spiritual and physical, but not for sex though, which was how I was definitely, no one was,
Yeah.
Paul's going, there's an ethic about what you eat and what you put in your body. So again, in a modern context, should we, if you're going to go down the one flesh route with your sexual theology, maybe you need to be thinking more ethically about the food you eat. I can say that because I am obviously a very arrogant vegan. So, but I don't have that theology. That's not why I'm vegan, by the way. I just really like animals.
Sure.
So yes, he does seem to think that there's a spiritual component, but the body is a place of neutrality for Paul. And then you can have a body that you live in a spirity way, or you can live in your body in a fleshy way. And he always wants you to be considering the spirit. And that's why he uses that example, because he goes, you are so joined to Christ that anything you do is something you do with Christ, including sleeping with a prostitute. And it's an extreme that he picks to make you think about what it is to be joined to Christ. You can't read that back into Genesis 38. You can't read it back into Song of Songs, because that's not how they're reading it. You can't read it back into Esther.
Yeah.
You can't read it back into Ruth. Those sexual ethics are very, very different. Very different. So we have the ability, therefore, to go, what's our sexual ethic that is positive or is good? We can't just build a theology around one verse in 1 Corinthians.
So do I take from that there is not in the Bible an explicit condemnation of masturbation? There's not any real talk about pleasure except for Song of Songs, which has its context.
Yeah.
So as a church then, would you say we've taken our cues more from society than from the Bible? Or what have we done?
I think we have. I mean, we've talked about patriarchy. We've taken our cues from a lot from society, and women have always been bodies to be controlled.
Yeah.
In patriarchy. We are dangerous. Women or people who have wombs can do something that classically kind of cis straight men can't do. And therefore we need to control that, because we can produce your children and you have no control over who we let do that.
Yeah.
So we have to build that control. And one of the ways is to disassociate us from our own bodies. So not only is our body owned by you, but we're not going to talk to you about it. And it makes us, as Rachel said, going back to kind of Rachel's original conversation with her friends, it makes us unsafe. It makes us just not knowledgeable. We can't talk to our friends about it. Therefore, we can't know that we're being abused or in an uncomfortable situation until we're there already. It creates this situation where, particularly I think young Christian women for a lot of time have been on the back foot. How do we even consent if we don't know what we like?
Yeah.
It's a big thing, like, how did we end up here? But we end up here because women are considered dangerous and powerful.
Yeah.
And so the best way to undermine that is to take away any language you have. If you have no language for your own body, you can't make a choice over it.
Yeah.
And you're taught to trust a man's choice over it.
I'm just thinking, I was talking to you the other day, Dad, about not even knowing the name for my own genitalia, not being able to look at a diagram and name it. And Emily Nagoski wrote a book called Come As You Are, which is a great book. But at the start of the book, she's like,
I'm guessing it's not about nirvana.
No.
No, it's not. At the start of the book, there's instructions at the start of the book to like get a mirror, look at yourself. This is the labia. This is the etc. And me being like, I really don't want to do this, but she's telling me that I can't read the rest of this book if I don't do this. And that's me at the age of like 21, 22, daring to do that for the first time.
Yeah.
Because all of that messaging is like, oh, this piece of your body is dirty. Like like literally, we bleed. There are odors. There are etc. All those things that like are just, we're made to feel that it's shameful. I went and had a smear test the other day, and I wanted to like say to the GP like, oh, I'm so sorry if it smells, I'm so sorry if it looks weird, I'm so sorry if it doesn't look like what you've seen before. Like, this is literally someone that looks about, I don't know, 10 vulvas a day. Like, we're told to just feel really awkward and embarrassed, and especially with like, media messaging around the way that our bodies should look. If our bodies don't look like that, like, we've not really touched on porn, but if our bodies don't look like those kind of bodies, they're not desirable. All of this messaging of just like, that leads to us, as you were saying, Charlotte, being like just entirely uninformed and like afraid to even engage with that. And we don't, like, if we're then going into sexual situations without going, this is the clitoris, this is what you do, this, without having any of that information, like, it's not going to be enjoyable for us. It's not going to be fun. And I remember like being in sociology, I must have been like, I don't know, 15 or something. And I wish I could remember the name of the sociologist, but I can't. But the example that they were talking about is, should we speak to 5-year-olds about their genitalia? And the person that was kind of arguing against this was like, well, no, because, if you told a child what it would be like to drive a Ferrari, all they would want to do is drive this Ferrari. If you talked about how fun it would be, if you talked about how much they would enjoy driving cars, they would just want to do it immediately, as if like that's a good reason. Like, we're not expecting 5-year-olds to just start going at it, are we?
No.
Like, that's a good enough reason. Like, oh, well, it might spark their interest, so that's why we're not going to speak to young children about their bodies and about their own genitalia.
Yeah, and the ludicrous thing about that is like, your average 5-year-old, 10-year-old doesn't have a Ferrari, but they do have the requisite parts. They can go and, they don't need a license. They can go and do, and so we need to get ahead of the game. I mean, the striking thing for me about that is the parallel conversation for men is literally all about size. Is it big enough? Mm-hmm. That's all it's limited to. And so the whole male psyche is geared around, is my dick big enough? Mm-hmm. Just a funny parallel conversation there of like, of a complete denial of information on the one hand on the female side, and then like a hyper focus on possibly the least important thing on the male side, and very little in between.
I was 2 or 3 years into my marriage before I did that exercise of looking at myself, because the first person to talk to me about it was a male friend of mine who's a nurse who trained nurses, and he said, I have to tell female nurses to go and do this because my male nurses have seen more vulvas than my female nurses have.
Wow.
Because we don't talk about ours and what they look like, and that they all look different and things like that. I don't think I'd really considered that they all look different. They are sort of naturally hidden in our bodies, so I'd never looked at it. Again, it's a non-Christian saying to me, do you not think you should know what your body looks like? And I was like, I had actually never considered that it would be good for me to know that. And because I was only ever going to be married to this one man, and only one man was going to see it. So what need was there for me to look at myself and know myself, because there was just this one man that was going to know me. So therefore, as long as he's okay, and I was lucky that I had a nice man, it just fascinating that I was therefore well into my 20s and already married and already sexually active before I even bothered.
I have a question for all of you guys, which was spurred by your memory of watching Skins in your teens. I, as a younger teenager, I don't know how or why I watched this movie. I watched at late night a movie by a guy called Paul Schrader. He wrote Taxi Driver. Every film he's ever made is about this kind of isolated man and the vicissitudes of modern life in America. He made a film called Hardcore, which is about a Christian businessman whose daughter runs away and ends up working in a very exploitative part of the sex industry. And he struggles to find his daughter, but he sort of befriends another sex worker. I don't remember very much about the film, except it was very shocking to me, weirdly. What I remember most of all is this young woman, sex worker, turning to this guy saying, "Do you think sex is important?" And him saying, "No." And her saying, "Well, I don't either." And I was really, really fascinated by that. Because even at a young age, I felt I come from what you used to call a broken home. I'd seen the power of sex to make and break relationships up close. I felt that sex was important. What do you guys think in general? Because it seems my view of the kind of contradiction at the heart of church is that church does say that sex is important, but then won't talk about it, which I find a very strange contradiction. What's your personal answer to that question? Is sex important?
I have a quick answer to that, and it's related to everything we've sort of talked about, which is if bodies are different, if people's makeup is different, then everyone's going to have a different answer to that question, depending on their makeup, their background, their experience. So the real answer is, if it's important to you, then it's important to know, and it's important to be able to talk about it. And that's kind of it, really, for me.
Yeah, excellent answer. I think sexuality is important, which includes people who are asexual. Knowing your sexuality, understanding yourself. And that's the difference for me, I guess, between the way that the church talked to me about sex and the way that society did once I started having those conversations with friends, was that the church stuff that I'd had and that I had taught was about controlling and monitoring a particular sex act. And this is the problem with the way that we talk about issues of homosexuality as well, is that we talk about it as sex acts. And partly because our Bible mainly talks about sex acts. As I've said, it doesn't really talk about sexuality. It talks about the a particular act that might be immoral. But knowing our sexuality, understanding your own sexuality, how you feel about it, how your body works, what you want, what you need, or what you don't want and what you don't need, incredibly important. Because I was also taught that I would want sex, which if you're asexual and you're in a church, I'm sure is very difficult, that when you get married, if you discover that actually this is not something that you want, and you just assumed that it was holiness that made you not want to have sex, and it turns out actually you're asexual or you're on the asexual spectrum. Knowing that about yourself, exploring desire so that you know who you are, is a different thing to kind of, is sex important?
So the one side of my life with this is like, it's all very hush hush, but don't talk about it. The other very like intrinsic like 12-year-old girl side for me is like flipping loved rom-coms, like any honestly, it could be about anything. Any romance movie that came out, I was there. I was in the cinema, I was with my friends, we would talk about it, we would obsess over it, like the kissing scenes, like honestly, it was like being in a cult. And I think for me, being a disabled young person and now a disabled adult, it's all of that ideas of this is a desirable body and a disabled body is not desirable. So I was looking at these movies like feeling yearning after something and kind of going, well, that's kind of, I'm not allowed to do it because it's wrong and because God says so. Like, that's one thing. Also, I'm not allowed a boyfriend until I'm 16, so that's another thing. We can talk about that later, Dad. We can talk about it later.
I don't remember that.
I remember that.
Oh,
so there's that,
boy.
but then there's also
I think I might be blushing.
This is the reason we're having this conversation. So then there's also my innate kind of that I will never be desirable because I'm not, my body is, I don't want to use the word broken, but it's imperfect, it's disabled, it cannot fulfill the same functions as other female bodies can. So there was all of that going on, and becoming interested in it in a completely normal teenage way, and also in a kind of, but what if I never have that? What if no boys ever like me because I'm a disabled person? So there was that going on, and coming into adulthood and masturbating and having sex and having an entirely individual experience with that, with a disabled body, for me has been entirely empowering. So I think sex is important because it is an expression of love between two people, and it's also important because it's been hugely empowering for me, just in terms of reclaiming the narrative around my own body and what my own body like can and can't achieve. And just thinking what you said, Dad, about stuff that we've kind of seen and watched, and I could talk about this show till the cows come home, but Sally Rooney's adaptation of Normal People, which is her novel, came out in 2018. It's about these high school kids in Ireland. And the TV show had a lot of buzz around it at the time for being very, very sexually explicit.
Yeah.
And the kind of gist of it is these two young people meet, they start having sex. At the time, I was about 20 years old and I was just completely bowled over by, oh, I've never done this before. Like, it might hurt. Are you okay? Do you want to keep going? Like, the openness of that communication.
Yeah.
And also just fully seeing, you know, it's not real sex, but like fully naked bodies on a screen. And then throughout this story, the female character, Marianne, they kind of come back in and out of each other's lives. And she goes away and she enters into an abusive sexual relationship. So what we've seen of her is she has this very kind of loving, pure, understanding, like beautiful sexual experience, which is really important, especially when you're a young person and you're doing this for the first time. And the fact that their first experience of sex is good is incredible to see. But she goes on in her adult life and she has sexual relationships with people that belittle her and abuse her and undermine her and like assault her. And she comes back at the end of the novel and meets Connell again, which is the young man that you meet at the start of the book, and they have sex again and she asks him to hit her. So you've watched this whole television show and you've gone, we've seen with our eyes and through their words and through their actions how tender and beautiful and passionate the sex is between these two characters that know each other, and they say to each other, it's not like this with other people. They can't really quite put their finger on what is unique about their sexual relationship, but she knows it's different to the sex that she's had with other people.
Yeah.
And because of the abuse that she's experienced through sex with other men, she comes back to this once very, very pure situation and she asks him to hurt her. So I think sex is important because it can be really, really good and it can be really, really, really damaging. And when we think about something as innate as sex, and part of the reason why I care about sexual assault so much and want to talk about it as much as I do is because that show for me was such a visualization of, even if he's a good guy, which he is, and he says to her, I don't want to do that. He stops having sex with her and he says, I don't want to hit you. And she leaves and she's crying and she realizes that she is like, oh, I'm really fucked up. I've asked this guy that loves me and cares about me to hurt me. And she's having that realization of, I've had sex and been in sexual situations where I've been harmed, and it's not ruined, but it's changed the way this really good sex looks.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's important, because it does something intrinsic to, even if it's somebody else's actions, what we were saying before about people that have been abused can say yes to things even though it's harmful and want things even though they know that it's harmful. That's the power of sex for me.
I think there's something really important there as well, because when we're talking about like the kind of comedy title of this, of like, you know, do Christians just need a good wank, is like one of the things about entering into a marriage, if you've never had sex before and you are a cis woman, is the chances are you will have been sexually assaulted. Most women will enter the marriage with some sexual trauma. I don't think that's an underestimation to say. I definitely had been sexually assaulted before I'd ever had a sexual experience. And if we have no conversations, particularly in sort of churches, around what sex is and what sexual desire is, and with men about what sex is for women and how vulnerable women are in that situation, how to ask what they like, what they don't like, or as a woman, how to say what you like or you don't like. I know we're being very heteronormative here, but that's the kind of like the conversation we've all been in. Then you can also end up with a very warped sex life inside that marriage, unless it's very good, unless you're very good communicators. Certainly for me, it took a long time to be able to communicate about sex in my marriage in a way that we both were comfortable with, because I didn't have language for it. But I also, you know, I was lucky. I'd talked to him before we got married about the sexual trauma I had experienced. But most, I would say, nearly everyone I know, something happened to them in their teenage years that gives you a kind of idea of like, oh, I'm a body to have things done to me. That's, and our language very much around those things is that these things are done to us. We don't have agency. It's hard as a person that's raised female to have agency over your body. It's a long journey. Most people I know, women, most of my friends are in their 40s and 50s, and it's only recently that we really feel like we've got command of ourselves. Real, true agency to say yes or no and be clear. Like, that takes a long time, because the way you're brought up is sex is a thing that is done to you. And sometimes it'll be done to you by good people, and sometimes it'll be done to you by bad people. But you are a thing that has stuff done at you. That's what that is. even when language around sexual assault, a report came out recently in my friend's ear about PR and kind of why women leave. And one of the things was women leave because they experience harassment. Like it's like we experience the weather. Like it's not done to us by men. We just experience that, you know, and again, we experience sex. It is done to us. So if we don't have these conversations, we're not encouraged to understand our own bodies, understand what we liked, what we didn't, why we liked it, why we didn't. I have no voice.
And I think, speaking as a man, in a long line of men who have been church leaders, not in terms of my family, but just the conversation about sex in society and more specifically in the church has been governed by men. So male sexuality becomes the centre, and women are, before marriage, they're temptresses. After marriage, they are sort of dutiful pleasure givers, primarily. That male desire is centred in most of the ethics that the church has taught, and women are slightly a blank. And it's given that it was mainly men talking about, I wonder why that might be. Perhaps there's a missing voice in the conversation about sex, so that what we've inherited from hundreds of years of church teaching has a huge missing piece, which is just women's experience.
Yeah. Can I ask you guys a question? So how did you feel about your bodies growing up? Were they things to be enjoyed, to be controlled, to like, what was the narrative of your kind of trajectory into then like getting married?
From a growing up in church perspective, I think that, again, we talked about this chasm of information and a huge gap. But in that gap, I feel like I inherited a lot of... Is it Calvinism? The sort of puritanical view of this kind of thing of like, you are inherently sinful. And so I think there was a sense of like, but as a teenager with the raging hormones, like you can't, you don't have the tools to fight that, as it were. You kind of, so I think there's like a long history where you're spending most of the time battling with your own urge to wank.
It's a general teenage male experience, right?
That's kind of it. And, and like I had different, I think I probably went through different phases of acceptance or resistance, and none of which were particularly satisfying. But it's funny, as an adult, I think it kind of occurs to me that I never actually stopped to think, are you enjoying this? What do you enjoy? What do you enjoy about this? What's the point? Because I've never thought that there is a point. And I feel like porn was a difficult thing. Like I came of age in the early internet era. Have I talked on this podcast about my 2-day spanning porn empire? I once early on printed off some pictures of Carmen Electra and took her into school. And a kid was like, "Oh, I'll buy that off you, 10p." I was like, "Oh, right, okay." And then another kid was like, "Oh, I'll buy that off. I'd buy that." And so I went home and printed more, and then brought them in the next day and started passing around. That was it. I was for 2 days when I was about 11. I was a porn baron. I don't know if I've ever told my parents that, but
they know now.
They will be listening.
I'm not sure if they'll be able to get through to this episode.
We'll see. They're very persistent. I think I became aware as I got older that it was inherently exploitative. It didn't really feel like a version of sex that I was interested in, but I also didn't have anything else to counter it with.
Yeah, and I think there are things there about, again, what it is to enjoy yourself and what it is to be a consumer of somebody else.
Yes.
What we can see, and historically men are allowed to be consumers and voyeurs. Like you're allowed to do that. You can consume somebody else's body. You can own it. You can, you can buy it for a time. You can, like that's okay, or something that you might want to do. The idea again of like women doing that is a much newer thing that women might want to kind of engage in that, or go to a prostitute or whatever. Like those are sex worker. Like it's very different. It's a very different way of thinking than it is kind of the norm.
Yeah.
My relationship with my body is it's conflicted, because on one level I'm a very sort of internalised intellectual person. I don't mean that I'm sort of super brainy. I just mean I'm an ideas person. So in terms of like what I wear, the most important thing is what's on my T-shirt, what idea is being communicated by. So I'm not someone that's hugely aware of my body, and yet I have great physical pleasure, not just from sex, but from food, for example. I indulge physical pleasure. But for me, my life is complicated. I think we'll have talked about this in the first episode, which, dear listener, we haven't recorded yet because we want to do it at the end when we know what we're going to say. I started having sex at quite a young age, and it was a whirlwind of emotions, and it all went very, very bad. As I say, my family situation was chaotic. My parents' friends were in very chaotic relationships. It was kind of like a musical chairs thing, that when the music stopped, everyone in that friendship group was with a different partner. So I was simultaneously aware that this desire within me for connection with another person, and for me it was an expression of my desirability as a human, my worth almost as a human being, that I was desired physically, but it was never just what does my body look like? Is there a person that wants to connect with me? But it was also tempered by this feeling that what people did with their bodies had this huge destructive power. So when I became a Christian, even though nobody had said anything to me, I knew that somehow becoming a Christian meant that I should stop sleeping with my girlfriend, because it just felt like this was a whirlwind that I needed to step out of. It was only later that I realised that was sort of the teaching. So I think at that stage, I didn't have like a steady girlfriend for about 3 years after I became a Christian. It wasn't because I didn't want one. It was just like I got quite close, and all these strong feelings. I was such a good Christian. It was like, oh, I can see how this would become a more passionate love than my love for Jesus. So maybe this isn't right.
It's interesting that, because I was thinking, I think there is something around the way we talk about sex that is a fear, kind of like the fear
This is what I was going to say.
Kind of like the fear of the telling a 5-year-old that somehow if you allow Christian young people to know, enjoy, think about these things, it will become the opposite of what it's meant to be. So it's meant to be about giving yourself to your partner, and therefore if we talk about your personal desire, you'll become selfish in the way you have sex, which obviously does happen. Some people are very, very selfish in the way that they think about sex, and they think it's all about them and it's not about giving pleasure to their partner, and because selfish people exist. But there's a sort of fear that that's definitely the thing that will happen, that's definitely what it will be. So you've got to think of sex as you giving yourself to the other person, not think of it as something you're getting. Obviously there is a balance. That I wouldn't want to think that sex for me was entirely just about me getting mine. Like, that would be awful. And I think, it probably isn't a very Christian way of having sex. But the flip side of that is these sort of dangers that we talk about, where now it's only about somebody else. So you put yourself in dangerous situations by accident, but it's inside a marriage, so it's definitely okay. And there seems to be just, a lot of fear of like, well, would it become more important to you than Jesus? Like, that sex is so powerful, you might like forget that you love Jesus because you just need to have sex all the time, which I just think is so weird. Because there's just so many more hours in a day. I mean, maybe
you've clearly
maybe
not
you've
been
got
a
stamina
15-year-old
than I don't
boy.
have, but
I think it's really interesting though that we've each shared early examples of sex, and fear has sat alongside all of them in one way or another. There's been a feeling of like none of us felt entirely comfortable with what was happening or the way that we were behaving, and actually how does that make us feel if lots of our early interactions with sex or something sexual feel like we're feeling fearful, we're feeling scared alongside feeling I'm kind of enjoying this, and I don't like that I am, or I don't know why I am. Or like early experiences of sex that aren't in your control and are just entirely scary.
What would you tell your teenage self now?
Gosh. I would tell me to ask questions. Because I didn't just have Christian friends. I had like older friends at school that weren't Christians. Like, I wish I'd gone to one of them. I wish I'd gone to my mum. I wish I'd just been like, I'm feeling like this, and I feel scared that you're going to find that out. I feel really afraid that you're going to discover this about me, because I tried to be a really good kid. I tried to be good in school. In fact, I wanted to be good in school. I appreciated the praise that I got for being good. And there are versions of Christianity that still exist, which almost feel a bit like a score chart. If you do this, this, and this, and this, you are the best Christian. And if you are the best Christian version of yourself that you can be, you are the most loved. You are God's favourite. Like, oh, I'm a better Christian than that person because of all the things that I am or aren't doing.
Yeah, that's right.
And I wish that I just turned to somebody that I trusted, because actually feeling like I wanted to masturbate and then masturbating as a teenager was an entirely isolating experience, because I didn't think that any other girl was doing it. I didn't think that anybody else was thinking about it. I didn't think that it was normal. I didn't think that it was allowed. It felt like that felt entirely terrifying. And like, I learned very early on as a child and as a teenager that if I was cooperative with my parents about like where I was going, for example, I would be allowed out more. I learned that very, very quickly, that like I wanted to share things with my parents. I wanted my parents to know me. And actually, as a child that had a disability, I had to get very, very comfortable early on talking to primarily adult men about the way that my body felt, because I don't know anybody else in the world with my version of cerebral palsy that I have. I have one friend who has an entirely different version of this disability. So even though we have the same disability, we can't actually relate to each other at all. Maybe on some level, but I don't understand the way that she navigates the world, and she doesn't understand the way that I navigate the world. So I had to be able to say to male physios and male doctors, it feels like this when you do that to me. When you touch me there, it feels like this. So I actually think, you know, what we were talking about as children not having that language and the advocacy over our bodies, I think I did to a certain degree, because it was encouraged. And I had to be able to say, it hurts when you do that. So I had that language on some level, but I didn't feel brave enough because of whatever external factors, church, school, whatever. I didn't feel brave enough to pull one of the people that I loved and trusted most in the world to say, I'm a bit confused about this. Yeah. I don't know how I feel about this. I feel scared. I don't want to get told off. You know, when you're a child, or at least when I was a child, I lived in fear of getting told off. That was something that I didn't want to happen. And I felt intrinsically that that's what was going to happen if I voiced that. So I think I would go back and be like, it's really normal to fancy people. It's really normal to feel horny. It's really normal to do the things that you are doing and to want to do the things that you're doing. And lots of other people in church are doing it too.
Yeah.
It's not just you.
So I'm thinking about this at sort of two levels for me. I'm in a different situation to everybody else. I mean, we've all in unique situations in this room, but I'm a divorced woman in her 40s. So I'm still talking this to myself. This is a conversation I'm having with myself right now about what is okay, what's okay to do with my body, what's, you know, and I'm a Christian minister. What is okay? What's okay to tell people? What's okay to talk about? If I take have a partner now, do I want to sleep with them? Is that all right? There's a whole bunch of narratives in my head about what is, you know, like, this is fine, I'm fine with it. And then you're like, but I'm very, like, it's always there in the corner of my mind. Like, it's very aware that most people will think if I'm having sex with someone that I am somehow morally depraved. Like, that's a real thing. In my teenage years, I put up with some stuff that later on I realised was abusive from classmates because I believed that I was meant to enjoy it. Because I fancied people, because I did want a boyfriend but I hadn't got one, when attention came that was not the attention I wanted, my brain went, but this is what you said you wanted. You wanted attention, so put up with it. Like, you don't seem to want, like, that confusion. And I think what I would have wanted to have is a conversation with someone where they said, both things can be true. You can want attention from somebody that you love and also not want and endure it from people who you don't like. If you don't like it, it's not okay. Yeah. Because we never had that conversation. I mean, it was the 90s, we didn't have that conversation. So I would have had that very clear kind of like, just because you want something, it's totally normal to want it. It's also normal to not want it from anyone. Like, that's not a thing. Like, just any attention from anyone is not the same as particular attention. I would have had that conversation really clearly. And I think that's part of where the confusion was, because the confusion for me as a young woman was, I don't really understand what I want and I don't know what I want, and nobody said, you know, no one helped me navigate that. So I would have wanted, and ask more questions. Like, I would have loved to have somewhere that I could ask those questions. Like, and again, church was the place where I was asking questions about everything else, but not able to ask these questions. And you think like, oh, couldn't we, if we'd have been better, wouldn't have there been a responsible adult at church that could have helped navigate that? But yeah, like for me, it's interesting because these are still the conversations that, like I say, I'm having now, and with friends of mine who have been Christian and were single for their whole lives and were waiting and are now in their 40s and are like, I was waiting to get married to do any of this. Do I still have to wait? Like, is this never going to happen? What do I do? So yeah, I think my conversation is that kind of like, it's okay. Like the things that you're feeling are okay and aren't shameful and aren't embarrassing. And outside in the world, everybody's aware of that. Like they're having these conversations. They are real and they're fine. They're fine.
Yeah. Simon, what would you tell your teenage self?
I'm still trying to think about it. And, like Charlotte, I've been a youth worker. So I've sat with lots of teenagers and I've completely blanked what I may or may not have said to them at that time. I'm literally imagining as a youth worker sitting with this kid, 15 years old. And I think I would say what's come up already, in a sense, whatever you're feeling is normal.
Yeah.
You're normal. Whatever you're feeling is okay. I think at the time, the youth leaders that I had, who were people that I came to know for the rest of their lives and really loved, they said they were really, really keen that people have lots of friendships and get to know lots of people, which I think was their conservative way of saying don't get attached to someone too quickly before you really know what you like. They would kind of say play the field, but in a non-sexual way. Yeah. To get to know different kinds of people. Don't get hung up on having one person that you become obsessed with. And I had a sort of tendency to, fall deeply in love, or at least become, in my fantasy world, attached to someone. I think I would say that's all fine. You will find someone who loves you. So just take your time. Enjoy being a young person. You can't tell a stressed person to chill. It just doesn't work. But that's what I would really want to say to that young man who was, from a slightly chaotic home background, had attachment issues, was looking for a girl to make everything okay. I would say it will come, and you will grow up. You will become someone that another person needs. The thing that you need from another person, you can't give them yet. You've got to do some growing up. So slow down, take your time, and the right time will come eventually for you to find a really good partner.
How do you think you would approach, like if we were children now, so me and my two siblings, if we were kids now and knowing what you know now and kind of going on the kind of journey that you have gone on with your own kind of ideas around Christianity, like how differently do you think you would approach that conversation with us around bodies and sex now?
That's a really good question.
That's such a good question.
In our downstairs loo, there's a book called Mummy Laid an Egg, which is a children's book about reproduction and body parts. Everyone's going to go to the loo after this.
Yeah, we are.
Because there's a double-page spread of Mummy and Daddy, like, having sex on a bike.
What?
And, like, this bit fits in here, and it's loads of fun. And look at all the different ways you can do it in, like, a children's cartoony kind of way. You don't remember that book?
No, because I feel like, no, I don't remember that, and I'm definitely going to go find this book now. But
we're going to do an extra episode where we read it out.
Yeah, oh my gosh, let's. But, like, I'm talking, like, Mummy and Daddy had a special hug, like...
Yes.
That's what we got. That's what I remember getting. Maybe there was more to it than that, but that's what I remember.
I think parents are parents, and I think we have a pretty good relationship. Here we are doing a podcast together about masturbation. I think
everybody's blushing.
I think at the time, whatever I said, and you told me that I did say it at the time, I still believed that underlying thing that any sex that's outside marriage is a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And we haven't said it out loud, but that's one side of a black and white duality that I think anyone listening this far will realise is a problem. That if you say that everything outside marriage is bad, then you've got nothing to say about the lives of most people in this country, most of whom have sex outside marriage. And obviously the flip side of that is, well, you just get married and then we don't really care about your sex life after you got... That's all morally good because it's happening...
Within marriage.
Yeah. So I think we would probably have more of a conversation about healthy relationships in general.
Yeah.
Rather than you need to sort of restrain yourself in one way or another and then one day you'll be married and then you'll have a proper relationship. Yeah. So I think instinctively... Like you live with a partner now.
Yeah.
And me 25 years ago would have felt duty bound, even though I think I would have been very emotionally conflicted, to sort of lean on you to say that you shouldn't live together. That you should kind of put your relationship into reverse.
I mean, we had that conversation and I said this to you yesterday, didn't I?
Yeah.
Like, do you remember telling me that you think cohabitation is bad? And we were like sat in the car as we did, you know, driving somewhere. And I asked you about it. And I remember the takeaway from that conversation being, if they live together and they're not married, even if they aren't having sex, everybody will think that they are. And that will be the implication. And that will be the embarrassment.
Yeah, and I'm embarrassed even thinking about that. But I know that I did think that.
That is what you thought,
And
yeah.
I think I had this really strong idea, even if intellectually I would have utterly opposed it, that somehow sexual sin is more serious than other kinds of sin. You know, if you were fiddling your taxes or...
I don't even know how to do my taxes.
No, but you know, somehow...
So it's very likely you're fiddling.
Oh, yeah.
So I think, you know, I'm really happy that you and your partner are living together. And because I see all of life now as something about growing rather than these black and white states of on one day I wasn't a Christian, the next day I was a Christian, on one day I wasn't married and the next day I was married, and that everything changed in that moment. I see life now as billions and billions of consecutive moments in which we're always making choices. And therefore I see you and your partner moving in together as moving, growing in a relationship that I see the scriptures saying is two people coming together and laying down their lives for each other and building each other up. That's something that your mum and I are still growing in. We didn't become a perfect married couple on the day that we got married, and we never will be. So now, when I think of two people moving in together, I think of two people who are choosing to make a commitment to each other. And I celebrate that rather than, oh, they haven't done this particular thing. So I think the way that we talked about that, I had a suspicion that one of your siblings might be queer.
Yeah.
And so I think from the time of you were like being 10, 11, 12, I was much more explicit. You may or may not remember it because it wasn't targeted at you, but I was making very explicit statements at the dining table about my changing views around that issue and wanting to make sure that, you know, if someone was queer, that they would feel safe. They would know that not only that we kind of tolerated them, but that we celebrated them and we believed that God celebrated them.
Yeah.
So I think if I'd got to where I am now at that time, 15 years ago, I probably would have made deliberate statements about things like that because it would have been kind of countercultural. It would have been different to what you were hearing in the church that you were attending at the time or what you would hear at school.
Yeah.
But at the time there would have been a conflict between my head and my heart at the time. I still had imbibed this idea somehow that if you have sex outside marriage, somehow like there's, you know, alarm bells go off in heaven and the angels are like, oh no, you know.
I think you said an interesting thing, which is that you probably would have felt duty bound, even if you weren't quite feeling it, to say, but this is the real thing. And I think we do come to a point where if we're thinking, well, what does the church have to say, that I have had people say to me, like, if we're not saying that marriage is the thing, then can we say anything at all? There's a kind of like, aren't we just disempowering the church if we say that marriage, because marriage is a really good controlling point, and religions are the people who are arbiters of holy matrimony. Like, we are the people who can tell you that your relationship is holy or not. And I think there is a fear around this whole conversation that if we're not telling young people they have to be married, then we can't say anything. And we've got to figure out, like, what is the thing that we can say? What do we have to offer? We've got a lot of stuff to unpick and unlearn before we get there, but I think that is one of the
Well, we've got
things.
2 episodes to unpick and unlearn before
I think that is
we have a go.
Yeah, I think that is one of the things, because that arbitrary line, it's not arbitrary, I shouldn't have said arbitrary, but that line in the sand has disempowered people before they're married, and it disempowers people after they're married to say, my relationship isn't good, my partner is abusive, this sex is violent, this, you know, like, we can't say any of that because it's holy, because it's in marriage, so it must be holy. And that's a really recent development in society as well. Marital rape was legal in the 90s, so, like, it's not that long ago that it was, everybody considered it to be the case. But I think that's partly, again, where the fear comes from the church, isn't it? Is like, if we don't say you have to be married, then what are we saying? And it's the same with the debate over gay marriage as well, is that.
Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss an episode. Episodes are released every other Monday, and next up is our Q&A episode on Monday, 2nd of March. If you'd like to ask us about anything covered in this episode, or anything else from the series so far, please get your question to us by Friday, 20th of February to feature. You can message us at agodwecouldbelievin@gmail.com or via our socials. Lastly, a reminder, if you'd like to support the project, make sure you share it widely, and you can patronise us by subscribing to agodwecouldbelievin.substack.com. Here you'll also receive bonus episodes and regular reflections from Simon and the team right to your inbox. We'll see you again very soon.